District 4. And so Planning Department has done just that. They have worked with and connected with all of the district supervisors throughout the city so that they can do the proper outreach throughout all the neighborhoods. And as a result, there have been some amendments that have already been made. There are more to be coming. And so today we really want to give you an update as to where things stand so that when the Planning Commission hearing happens on January 28th, you have a say in what Planning Department will be presenting. So before I turn it over to the planning staff, just by a show of hands, I'm curious as to who went to last meeting and who feels like they might need a refresher on the presentation as to the basics of the program. Okay, so there's people who still would like that presentation. Okay, great. So we'll have planning staff do that. Kirsten and Gil are here from the planning department, and Menica as well, and Andy. But however, after they go over the presentation, I do have one very important question that I want to pose to all of you. And it mainly concerns a lot of the people who live down by the Ocean Beach areas. And so whether we move forward with an amendment or not, I'm going to be polling all of you to figure out whether we should do so, and I want to also be very explicit about what that means if we do some sort of amendment to exempt out properties near Ocean Beach that are Kirkham and north of that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the planning staff before we go into the top of the amendments. So with that, here's Gil.
Thank you, Supervisor. Thank you and welcome this evening. Thanks for those of you making a return visit. From last October, I think, is when we were here before, and there has been a lot happening. Kirsten, who has been managing the project for the staff, is going to be kind of recapping the basics of the program and then also telling you about the changes that have been made based on what we've been hearing from neighborhoods and communities around the city. My role tonight, and let me introduce myself for those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting. I'm Gil Kelly, and I direct the long-range planning function for the city within the planning department. And I just wanted to set a little bit of context and then tell you a little bit about sort of how we want this evening to unfold. Remember that the reason for all of this is really the affordable housing crisis that the city has. And while you can think about that in very abstract terms, it's also very real for residents of the city who can't find housing, really, that they can afford in San Francisco any longer. And just a couple of things to think about in your own minds is that we now have the highest median housing price for purchase in the entire country, higher than New York. Now that has not been true for very long, but that's the situation now. The typical rents, and Kirsten will go through this, are beyond what people can afford to pay by any reasonable amounts. And so the challenge for the supervisor and for others on the board is really how to augment the supply of housing that is affordable over the long term for your kids or for their friends or for people who are school teachers and librarians and firefighters and so forth. I mean, this is a real issue. And so we have taken stock of that issue and know that while it's true that it's a regional problem and there needs to be a regional set of solutions to attack the problem, there's also work that San Francisco needs to do. We've underproduced housing for the last 3 decades, and that situation's coming home to roost now. So in assessing the kind of suite of tools that we have, this is only one tool, and this tool is a modest but important potential addition to the affordable housing stock of the city. It's really focused on making kind of strategic infill, unlike maybe some of what you've heard on the blogs and in the media about wholesale raising of neighborhoods and redevelopment. This is really meant to really focus on infill development and make a portion of that affordable. In trade for Haight, essentially. Kirsten will explain the details, but I wanted to sort of let you know that it really is meant to be a very kind of focused infill strategy, and there are a few places in the sunset where this would apply if it were passed, and we'll give you the detail on that as well. But really remember that this is all about, and we'd like your thoughts about this, really how to address the affordable housing crisis that we have. It's not going away. San Francisco's been adding about 10,000 people every year for the last several years, and that's projected to continue for the next, for the foreseeable future, for the next at least 15 or 20 years. So we'll be adding at that pace about 150,000 more residents over the next 15 years. That's a lot of folks. Will those be only high-income folks? And that's kind of the question for us, is what kind of city we want to be. And so this is meant to be one part of the answer to that question. And it's important to go through the details so you understand it, understand the implications of it. But I wanted to just set that larger context. And the other piece behind that number of 10,000 new residents every year, that's actually a net number. And by that I mean there are actually 70,000 new residents every year in San Francisco over the last several years, and 60,000 are leaving. So in a period of 5 or 6 years, that's a population the size of Oakland leaving San Francisco in that period of time. And the numbers show that for the most part, those are middle and lower income families and individuals leaving. And the new people coming in are generally higher income people. So it does sort of bring up the notion of what kind of city do we want to be. And some people are saying we're losing our soul as a city if we can't find opportunities for new people to come who are middle income and moderate and low income to stay here. So that's the context that we're trying to address. And I just like to bring people back to that kind of basic point before we launch into the details, because it's sometimes easy to get lost in the whys and wherefores. So Kirsten will do that for you and explain the basic trade-offs involved and what we've learned through our community discussion so far and how the program's been amended and evolved since we came to you last October. One thing that we've found successful in this series of meetings is actually to ask you to write your questions about this either right now or during the presentation on the 3x5 cards that were given to you. And if you don't have them, we've got others to hand out. Andy here has a stack of cards. What that allows us to do is know that we have recorded your concern in your words or your question in your words, which can then be forwarded on to the decision-making bodies, the Planning Commission, and ultimately the board. But also, we're going to use them tonight after the presentation to read them and get responses to your individual questions in your own words. And that way, we also allow everyone to speak and have their questions answered as best we can answer tonight. Following that, we'll have additional time we hope to have open for. So if there are additional questions or comments, you'll have an opportunity to ask us or speak then as well. But following the presentation, and we'd really like you to kind of hold your questions on the details until afterwards, and we'll go through these cards, and I'll do that. I'll perform that role this evening. So any questions about the process?
If you stated several things, and I'm sure you believe them, but I think several of them are debatable, just as basics for the discussion. And so I really, I mean,
Well, then put those down on a sheet of paper and let's have that, and then let's talk about that. Because we're certainly not here to close off questions you may have about any of the assumptions here. That's a fair debate point. So I encourage you to write this down. I don't want to open this with a debate, but let's get through the presentation so we're all seeing the same information. There's a question in the back too.
Yeah, I just had a question for something you said. How many years have 70, your estimate, 70,000 people coming into the city?
Yeah, this was a study the city's economists did, and I think it was based on the last 3 years, so it's been ramping up. Things are not slowing down, so it's hard to know exactly how long that will. It's certainly not going to be a flat line into the future, but that's what the last several years have showed us. Yes?
And who's projecting that it'll continue that way for 15 years when we know we have booms and busts?
Well, of course, never 1 year is not exactly like another, so there are cycles, but though that projection really comes out of the ABAG numbers, so the numbers that all the communities around the Bay Area kind of live by in terms of projections. And
So that comes from the ABAG?
yeah, and so far that's turned out to be true. In fact, we've actually exceeded the ABAG projections for the last several years, both in terms of jobs and new residents. There's no perfect knowledge about the future, but that's the estimates that we're working with and the real experience we've had over the last several years to support those estimates. One more question and then we should get into the
The
presentation.
city pushing other than Oakland, San Jose, is it pushing other cities and counties in the Bay Area to ramp up their development of housing, especially in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, it's a great point, and we certainly are engaging in those discussions and advocating that happen, and we're certainly doing that at the regional bodies as well. We don't hold all the cards there, but we don't think we can solve this problem on our own, and it's really important to advocate that the other cities and counties come along. Okay, why don't we?
Just one
yeah,
point.
sure.
Sorry, just one point I forgot to mention before I turn it over to Kirsten, but I appreciate Gil talked about the affordability challenges. However, I think there's one other really important point that I did mention at the last meeting, but I need to emphasize again. There is an existing state density bonus law, and it's been on the books since 1979. And so there has been, if you read the section, we can send you the code, but there is a requirement in there that local jurisdictions have a program in place, a local version of this, either the state density bonus law, or we create something that meets or beats that program. And so this has been on the books for a very long time. San Francisco has not had our affordable housing bonus program, though it was required. And in 2013, again, as we mentioned at the last meeting, there was a court case that came out of Napa that really solidified the fact that we need to be doing this. And so as much as some of you may not like what you see in this local version, it certainly is an alternative to what the state offers, which I think is far more generous and far less forgiving to our neighborhoods than the local version we're proposing. And so what I ask of all the residents here today is you need to think about the context of the state law. Would you rather work with us to figure out what we can do with this local version to put in amendments that address many of your concerns? Or the alternative is that underlying all of this, the state law still exists and will continue to exist unless a state legislature changes it. So I wanted to remind everyone about that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kirsten.
Great. Okay, great. Hey, everybody. Good evening. Kirsten Messenger, Planning Department staff. I saw Jeff Buckley from the mayor's office just joined. Are you good to join a Q&A? I can roll through the presentation. Okay, welcome. Everybody, you've heard a lot about why now. I think Supervisor Tang just really summarized what started our questioning and our research, which is there is the state density bonus law. It's been on the books since the late 70s. It says there is a law in California that if you build affordable housing, then you get a bonus or a density benefit to offset the cost of subsidizing that affordable housing. It's a really cool tool, actually. I mean, many of you probably voted for or remember that it was up for vote of whether we do a housing bond, which is a way to fund affordable housing. We take general funds and issue a bond, and it's paid back by the general fund. That's a great way to do 100% affordable housing. We can't really build all the affordable housing we need with just public subsidy. So this tool is really fascinating. It says, we'll keep the value of the land constant. We'll increase the value for the property by saying you can build more units. And rather than letting the developer walk away with that value or the landowner, we say the city recaptures that value in the form of affordable housing. So let's say you could build, I always use 100 because I can't do math publicly, but let's say you do 100 units, and if you were to add a few more, like 35% more, which is the state program maxing out, you'd get the value of those extra 35 market rate units, but rather than walking away with it, you'd have to build more affordability out of those 135. So it's a really good tool for us to help complement our public funding. So that's also why now, because we have this huge affordable housing crisis, and we can't solve it with funding alone. We can't build our way out. There's a lot of things we can't do. Putting all these tools together, we can maybe get to a more equitable and inclusive city. And by the way, the state law that we've been talking about is really great for low and moderate income households, but it doesn't do anything to incentivize middle income. That's where our local program comes along. I only recognize about half of you, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, but we can go back to them in the Q&A. So this is just a reminder of who is what income. AMI, or Area Median Income, is calculated by household size. And this chart shows you for a one-person household and a four-person household in San Francisco what the median income is. We actually go all the way from 10% to 200% in our charts, so this is a summary. And our 100% affordable projects generally service the two lower income groups. Our existing inclusionary programs that are mixed income product service the moderate income group, and this would be the first program that services the middle income group. And it changes by household size, and then it changes every year. It gets updated based on what the federal government and the state government calculate.
So those gross incomes,
Yes,
not after tax or?
correct.
Okay.
And then you've probably seen a lot of maps in the media that's been covering the program, about the program area. I want to just talk a little bit about why we picked the parcels we picked and why we didn't include some parcels in the program area. So first off, it's a program about incentivizing a percentage of the units to be affordable. So districts that are only allowed to have 1 or 2 units were left out. The state law says it's only the state law requires at least 5 units or more, so the state's okay with that, and we also think that that works a lot better. So most of the city is RH1 and RH2, most of Supervisor Tang's district is RH1 or RH2, single family or 2, and left out. But we are looking at places where you can build more housing, where you have all of our program area is within a quarter mile or walking distance from the Muni Rapid Network, which is the network that MTA planned to invest most of their funds to up the service. And we're really focusing in on a particular kind of site. These are sites that currently are underutilized. Maybe they're parking lots, gas stations, or smaller buildings. They're about 5% of their total development capacity. And our financial feasibility tested to make it work for those size programs. And then this is a really important point. The number of the production of the program has been talked about a lot. The program is a 20-year program. Once this is adopted, it will take a lot of time for developers to grow interest in these different areas, acquire the sites, design the buildings, and move forward. I've been hearing this development cycle is over, so we've always been kind of thinking we are actually planning for the next development cycle. This is your neighborhood. Hopefully you can see the yellows and the purples. That's the parcels that are included in the program area in your neighborhood. The yellow parcels are your RM, residential mixed-use areas, and the purple parcels are neighborhood commercial corridors. There's a variety of different names for them, so they're different colored purples, but you get the general sense. So in your neighborhood, we think that there would be, under the current controls, about 375 units developed, with only 45 of those being affordable. And the program I'm going to talk to you about has 2 options. One is the state program, and that would produce 510 units in your neighborhood, with 77 being affordable. And with the local program, we're talking about 1,000 units, with 327 being affordable. We actually don't think each soft site would naturally choose the local program. Some will choose the state, some will choose the local. They'll make that choice based on the finances of their particular site. So we don't think it's really going to be the full 1,000. It's somewhere between that 500 and 1,000 over a 20-year period. Just to give you a sense, the whole program we think would generate about anywhere between 10 and 16,000 units. This shows you where they're distributed. In the darker areas, there's more. In the lighter areas, there's less. And anything that's white is less than 1%. The reason you're seeing a lot of white districts is, first of all, you'll see a lump of single-family homes. And the other thing you'll see is SOMA and the Mission. And we removed any area that was recently in our plan areas, so that is SOMA and the Mission. They're undergoing a separate study to figure out how to further incentivize affordable housing. Notable for you, about 3% of the total program is in the Outer Sunset. On average, it increases density in some neighborhoods by up to 6%. Probably only planners have any idea of what that means or any visualization. So just to give you a comparison point, in SOMA and the Mission, we have increased density and we're seeing density change by 30 to 40%. So when you're thinking about how will my neighborhood change, and you're looking at where I live, where we work, in the Mission, Upper Market, where you're seeing cranes everywhere, that's a 30 to 40% change. In your neighborhood, we're talking about 3% change. So a much more of an infill approach than a wholesale revisioning of the neighborhood. I'm losing my voice. This is program 1, the local program. This one encourages people to provide 30% affordability on site. That's 12% inclusionary. How many people do not know what the inclusionary program is? Okay, one person. Okay, so inclusionary says, and this is an existing law that we have in the city of San Francisco. We're one of the first cities to do it, but it's really happening in most cities now. New York is, did they work it out yet? Working on it? Constantly working it out. If you have a certain building size, you must make a certain percent of those units affordable for the life of the project. In San Francisco, we've been doing this since about 2003. The numbers change all the time. You might be hearing more about that in the coming months. But right now, we're at 12%. So go back to that sample project of 100-unit building. If 12 of them are affordable, then you're required to make 12 of them affordable as part of your project. Let's say you're building a high-rise and you're like, why? Like, the value of these properties is so high. You might not choose to build the units on-site affordable. You would choose instead to pay the city a fee into our affordable housing fund. And that money would go to build 100% affordable housing. About 80% of our projects choose to build the units within their existing building. This program assumes that incentivizes people to choose to build them on site rather than pay the fee, and then add a remaining 18% to be affordable to middle income households. In exchange for that, or to subsidize that level of affordability, so going from 12% to 30%, we say, first, you can have up to 2 additional stories. So if you're currently able to build up to 40 feet, you could build 60 feet. Or 60 feet, then you could build to 80 feet. And second, you can have your density defined by the height of your building and the bulk of your building that's allowed. That's actually how most zoning codes are being rewritten. We rewrote the zoning code on the eastern side of the city that way. DC, Miami, LA, New York, everyone is kind of updating the way they program their cities or code their cities. So one of the things that's really important, especially to your district, and one of the things that Supervisor Tang has often brought up is what about family housing? And so we have required that 40% of the units be 2-bedroom or more. So right now in your neighborhood, there's no requirement. People could build a couple studios and be done with their project. We really want a diversity of housing stock, so we've said, of this project, 40% of the affordable and of the market rate must be 2-bedroom or more. And this is the state program. It assumes you do your 12% on site. There's an incentive there for you to add 1 to 8% more, depending on whether you're rental or ownership product. Your total would be 15 to 20%. And in this program, you could get 0 stories, 1 story, or 2 stories. It really depends on what your zoning is and how big your parcel is. We have a formula in our planning code. So one thing we don't have is our team negotiating with the development community. It's really based on, can you fit the extra density in the volume you're allowed without getting really small units? If not, then we'll let you have some extra volume to accommodate it. It's a really good formula, but by the way, it's state law that we allow them to have that extra space. So it's a requirement. They also would be able to get a few other little incentives. And then there's the 100% affordable product. So this is one that we talked about a lot at the last meeting. So 100% affordable housing, again, is for the lower income categories generally. It also is 100% subsidized. And we generate about 2 or 3 buildings a year of this type of housing because our main limitation is actually the funding to support it. So you voted on a bond. We also have a housing trust fund in the city. We also have that inclusionary housing money that comes in when people pay the fee. The Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development has a very long view capital plan, and they have gaps in that plan. So we pretty much know where most of those projects are. One thing that's really cool about this program is the Mayor's Office and the nonprofits that build these housing have acquired a number of sites, and this program will enable them to go up 3 stories. So they'll be able to get way more units for the public money we invested in acquiring those sites. So that was, I was supposed to be quicker even, but that was the overview of the program. And now I want to talk about, since we were here last, what has changed in the Affordable Housing Bonus Program, in the legislation. I don't know if some of you know, last week a substitute legislation was introduced by the mayor. The first draft was on September 29th. The second draft is last week. There are a lot of changes that were made, some of them by the request of your supervisor, some by other constituents, some by us just noticing some confusing pieces in the language. I'm going to walk high level through that. I'm going to invite Monica up actually to walk through some pieces too. And then after that, we're kind of ready for Q&A. So the first thing is we committed when we were here last to have community meetings in every district. And special thanks to Andy Nelson back there, who somehow miraculously got our whole clan to about 17 community meetings between September and now. We've been doing this presentation, hearing from lots of different groups. Many of you have been participating. I don't have all the numbers memorized, but we've been to every district at least once. We have a couple more this week, and I think even next week. Yep. So we're still going, and so we'll hit 18 by the time we get to our commission. Again, there's a lot of information on our website if you are ever just really curious about something. But most recently, we just posted, I want to say 70 or 90 questions that we've received with the answers. As Gil said in the beginning, we really value the input that we get from you, and it's really good for me to hear it, but it's even better for us to go back to the office, type it up, think about it, and write a response. So if you haven't seen a response to your particular question yet, we have a Q2 and a Q3. We're going to get to those this week and next. We decided to release a first batch because people were so excited to see their answers.
What's the website? It is www.sf-planning/AHBP. It's on your one-pager as well.
It's on the handouts. I think if you just Google the name of the program, you'll get this website. Okay. All right. So I said that there was a new version of the legislation introduced on last week. Just so you guys know, when a draft legislation is introduced, it's very traditional for both the Planning Commission to review it and ask for changes, for the board committee to review it and ask for changes, for the full board to review it and ask for changes. So there's been some perception, which is very natural out there, that this program is baked, this plan is done, there's no room for input, and that's really not true. And I hope that some of the changes you see here respond to some of the concerns that you've been having. and you see room for further improvement, please do reach out to us and the supervisor. One thing, the first thing, and Menika's going to walk through some of these, I'm just going to give you a high-level summary. We heard from your team, your community, that there's a concern that too many lots could be merged, so we addressed that issue. We also added some things. There's an evaluation of the program. The evaluation happens the first year, every year, and then every couple years at different scales. So we added criteria. People were like, what about this? How will we know if this happens? So we required that we report that to the public. We've also limited or clarified some limitations of the program. When you remove density, some people imagine there's going to be small units everywhere, so we really don't want that. We don't think that's where this neighborhood or most of the neighborhoods we're working in are going. So we've said you can't do group housing, which is where there's common space and little bedrooms, and you can't do micro units if you're using this program. We've made it clear that you can't add an addition onto an existing building. This is really only for a new construction. And this one is, we're going to talk about this like 17 times today because this is the most important thing. We've made it crystal clear that if the existing building is rent control, you cannot demolish it to use this program.
For how long?
We're going to talk about that, but it's in perpetuity. And then we've clarified a bunch of definitional things, which I don't even really understand, so Menika can answer questions on those. So,
Can we switch so I can take a break? Yeah, sure. Okay. Kirsten will go back to those slides. She's just losing her voice. So one thing I wanted to address with everyone here is the issue of lot mergers. So our team sort of looked at the current regulations in your district, and right now there are no regulations around merging several lots together. Those regulations exist in very few places in the city, but we wanted to understand what the existing context is in the Sunset. So if you sort of look at this is a typical street in, I think it's Irving Street. And the typical block length is around 240 feet. And you can sort of see that on the commercial corridor, you have sort of bigger lots already. So it's a mix of small lots and big lots, which is great. It gives sort of variation in the commercial corridor. So we wanted to sort of use that existing data to inform what kind of regulation makes sense for the Affordable Housing Bonus Program. And after meeting with the supervisor and looking at comments, and then also meeting with our architects on the planning staff side, we decided that we would prohibit, Planning Commission.
And the Planning Commission, who weighed in on this, that we would prohibit the merging of lots that result in a street frontage of 125 feet, of more than 125 feet. So we feel like that's a good regulation to have, and I think I can take questions on that after. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is the review process. I think there's some misinformation there that we are making it a streamlined process, and I think of it as a comprehensive process. For our local program, we really wanted to make sure projects that were providing 30% of affordable housing on site went to the Planning Commission. There's many things in our code that trigger when you go to the Planning Commission or not, and we just wanted to make sure that those projects were going to get a Planning Commission hearing. So that always happens if the project is participating in the local program. The pre-application, or what we call before you even get to the Planning Commission process, doesn't change. So you still have to do what we call a PPA, which is your first interface as a project sponsor with the planning department. And basically at that stage, you write out what's your plan, what are you planning to do on the site, what are you looking to do, and all of those letters are public. They're made public to the website so that project sponsors can see them and community can see them. So they're the first step. All projects that have new construction have to do what we call a pre-app meeting or pre-application meeting with neighbors. We didn't change that, so they still have to do the pre-application meeting. They would come into the planning department, what we call our project review. That still happens. That process can take a long time because we really look at the input that happened in that pre-app meeting. Then there's also the SPUR review, the environmental.
And then we notify. So our notification depends on what program you're doing. We notify for the hearing if you're doing the local. And then if you're doing the state project, whatever you trigger in the code currently, you would trigger at this program. So if you trigger 311, 312 notification, that would happen in the state program. And then finally, our entitlement process is the same. Oh, so I think I kind of talked about this. The other thing is in the review of our architects, when they review, we still have the design review. So there's still a lot of active design review that happens in the planning department. And we created design guidelines, which Kirsten may touch on in the Q&A, that address affordable housing bonus projects. I think I'll go back to those other slides.
Okay, so this is the one I said we'd talk about a while. Sorry, I had to take a break there. So there's been a lot of questions about the way this program relates with rent control units that exist in the city. And the state thought about this, actually with the help of the Los Angeles Advocates for Tenants. They said, look, if you're going to demolish a rent control unit, you have to replace it one for one. San Francisco's Tenants Advocates community, and specifically Supervisor Breed, with Supervisor Tang and the mayor's support, said, you know what, that's not enough. This is San Francisco. It's not just San Francisco, but it's San Francisco at a moment where we're seeing high rates of evictions, we're seeing high rates of displacement, we're really worried about losing the people that are here in San Francisco, and we understand there's all these options and programs and ideas, but we really want to just protect our rent control tenants. So the amendment that Supervisor Breed has offered to this program, which if you look at our case report we published last week, you can see some language on it, and you can see that the department is recommending that and the commission support this amendment. It says you cannot use this program if you are planning to demolish a rent control unit, and it has some language in it about when it was rent control, and it goes back in time because we really don't want to see everyone go, okay, well I better evict everybody now so I can use this program to demolish my building. So I think we should have, and I know we have a tenant advocate expert in the room, so I think we've made it pretty foolproof for those kinds of loopholes. And it's also included a request that the planning department and other city agencies really take a closer look at our rent control stock and our rent control supply and really think more holistically about how to preserve it and manage it. One of the things that we noticed in our research is we don't have really solid data on where the rent control parcels are, and we don't really understand them. The last study we did was in the early 2000s. It's a whole different world. So just to be 100% underlined clear, if you have you cannot demolish a rent control building if you're using either of these programs.
This is. Read us that language, please, of the amendment. Could you just read us the actual language? I can do that right now.
During the Q&A, Melick is going to look it up right now. Okay, so I was really hoping this would show up a lot better, but what our expert mapper did, and I'll put this online so you can see it, is kind of went through your neighborhood. We have a proxy data of where parcels are rent controlled. Believe it or not, we use whether they pay a special fee on their taxes or whether they've asked to waive this fee. It's a $25 fee, so a lot of people don't ask to waive it, but they're not rent controlled, so it's not bulletproof data. But you can see over half of the parcels in your district that are part of the program area are rent control. So when you are now walking down these corridors, you're saying, okay, over half of these buildings cannot be demolished, they all have to stay where they are. So that's kind of the point of this slide. I recognize that if I can't see it, you definitely can't, so we'll put that online. I think we're going to talk about this during the Q&A, but here's a zoom in of the Great Highway, and hopefully you can see the areas to the right that are in the program area should be yellow, so if they're the darker color, then they're rent control units. So now that our rent control tenants are protected, the question really has been, what about our small businesses? And for that, there's two questions. One question is, we really like our neighborhood character, P.S. we like a place to get groceries and to get certain things fixed. We just really like having the services and the way the neighborhood feels, question one. And then question two, what happens to that small business when they're asked to leave their space, and they can't afford the new space? There is no rent control protections for these small businesses, so what happens? We've been working with the Office of Economic and Workforce, the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development on this issue. We've been working with them for a long time. The first thing we heard from them is, what happens to a small business? They find out they're being evicted, 3 months later they're evicted, they have no time to plan for that. It turns out it takes a really long time to develop a business plan to figure out how to move, to find a new location, to raise funds for capital improvements, to get permits to make the capital improvements, and then do them. So what we said is easy. Any project that goes through the Affordable Housing Bonus Program has to go through that whole long process Monica spelled out for you. So if we just let them know early in the process, hey, I'm applying for a construction permit on this site, you're going to be evicted in 1, 2, 3 years, that gives that business owner maybe a little bit of anxiety, but also a lot of time to plan. And what we will include, we'll require that they submit a letter showing that they've written to all of their tenants, and then we will require that they connect those tenants to neighborhood services for small businesses. We're continuing to work with the Invest in Neighborhoods group at the OEWD, at the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, to fine-tune that. So that addresses this particular business tenant. But what about the character in our streets? And what about having neighborhood services? On the neighborhood services, we do think this program will result in a net increase in both residents and commercial space. So that means the businesses that do stay will have a larger group of people to support and sustain their business. There'll be more spaces for services to come. I grant you that this new space will be less affordable than the existing space, but there will be more space, so there will be room for services. And we're really working hard on figuring out how to make sure we get the kinds of tenants we want, the kinds of business operators we want. And one really good idea we have is, and this came out of a lot of our work around trying to limit formula retail, we found that there's a size that formula retail really likes, and then there's a size that small business operators really like. So one thing we could do, and we're not proposing this yet, we're thinking about this and looking for your input on this, is limit the size of the new commercial spaces so you can't have a big footprint, and so then you're getting a smaller actor in there. We're open to ideas on that. There's some people that think it shouldn't be there, some people that think it should be very small, it should be exactly as it was. We're interested in your input. And I think Monica walked you through these guys. So, I'm going to go rapid fire through this, but this is just to kind of explain what we mean by the places where we think development will actually happen. It's a few images of actual sites in our program area that are soft. I think this one's in your neighborhood, I think 30th and Noriega. And this one is a real soft site, actually in Market Octavia plan area at Market Street. And then sort of on Filbert, I think that says, Filbert and Van Ness. And this is what replaced that gas station. And we hired David Baker Architects to help us imagine what these buildings might look like. I think there's some concern about adding 2 stories in a neighborhood that's been 40 feet for so long. So the red line you see there is if the building were built to 40 feet, or sorry, the existing height limit, I think this one is 50 feet, what it would look like. And then what it looks like in 2 more stories. Just to be totally clear, this isn't a building that David Baker spent a lot of time and his firm designing. They just really quickly mocked it up. It's an existing street in San Francisco, and they're just adding that one building. And here's another one. This is, I believe, Inner Sunset. And it goes from 8 homes to 13 homes. So then next steps, like I said, we'll have a few more community meetings over the rest of the month. And then we'll be having a hearing at the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is a body that recommends policy direction to the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors will hold hearings at the Land Use Committee. The Land Use Committee will again review the legislation, make recommendations to the full board. The full board will then hold hearings, make recommendations to them, maybe adopt, and then the mayor signs into law. So we've got a full team of folks here, Jeff in the back, I don't know if you want to add anything, the supervisor, Menaka, myself, and Gil to help you guys through the Q&A. Andy's collecting questions, so if you have more questions, get cards from her, and we're ready to go.